The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 15. The Supra-Rational Good. We begin to see, through the principle and law of our religious being, through the principle and law of our aesthetic being, the universality of a principle and law which is that of all being, and which we must therefore hold steadily in view in regard to all human activities. It rests on a truth on which the sages have always agreed, though by the intellectual thinker it may be constantly disputed. It is the truth that all active being is a seeking for God, a seeking for some highest self and deepest reality, secret within, behind, and above ourselves and things, a seeking for the hidden divinity. The truth which we glimpse through religion lies concealed behind all life. It is the great secret of life, that which it is in labor to discover and to make real to its self-knowledge. The seeking for God is also subjectively the seeking for our highest, truest, fullest, largest self. It is the seeking for a reality which the appearances of life conceal because they only partially express it, or because they express it from behind veils and figures, by oppositions and contraries, often by what seem to be perversions and opposites of the real. It is the seeking for something whose completeness comes only by a concrete and all-occupying sense of the infinite and absolute. It can be established in its integrality only by finding a value of the infinite in all finite things, and by the attempt, necessary, inevitable, however impossible or paradoxical it may seem to the normal reason, to raise all relativities to their absolutes, and to reconcile their differences, oppositions, and contraries by elevation and sublimation to some highest term in which all these are unified. Some perfect highest term there is by which all our imperfect lower terms can be justified, and their discords harmonized, if once we can induce them to be its conscious expressions, to exist not for themselves, but for that, as contributory values of that highest truth, fractional measures of that highest and largest common measure. A one there is, in which all the entangled discords of this multiplicity of separated, conflicting, intertwining, colliding ideas, forces, tendencies, instincts, impulses, aspects, appearances, which we call life, can find the unity of their diversity, the harmony of their divergences, the justification of their claims, the correction of their perversions and aberrations, the solution of their problems and disputes. Knowledge seeks for that in order that life may know its own true meaning and transform itself into the highest and most harmonious possible expression of a divine reality. All seeks for that. Each power feels out for it in its own way. The infrarational gropes for it blindly along the line of its instincts, needs, impulses. The rational lays for it its trap of logic and order, follows out and gathers together its diversities, analyzes them in order to synthesize. The suprarational gets behind and above things and into their inmost parts, there to touch and lay hands on the reality itself in its core and essence, and enlighten all its infinite detail from that secret center. The truth comes most easily home to us in religion and in art, in the cult of the spiritual and in the cult of the beautiful, because there we get away most thoroughly from the unrestful pressure of the outward appearances of life, the urgent siege of its necessities, the deafening clamor of its utilities. There we are not compelled at every turn to make terms with some gross material claim, some vulgar but inevitable necessity of the hour and the moment. We have leisure and breathing time to seek the real behind the apparent. We are allowed to turn our eyes either away from the temporary and transient, or through the temporal itself to the eternal. We can draw back from the limitations of the immediately practical and recreate our souls by the touch of the ideal and the universal. We begin to shake off our chains. We get rid of life in its aspect of a prison house, with necessity for our jailer and utility for our constant taskmaster. We are admitted to the liberties of the soul. We enter God's infinite kingdom of beauty and delight, or we lay hands on the keys of our absolute self-finding and open ourselves to the possession or the adoration of the eternal. There lies the immense value of religion, the immense value of art and poetry to the human spirit. It lies in their immediate power for inner truth, for self-enlargement, for liberation. But in other spheres of life, in the spheres of what, by an irony of ignorance, we call especially practical life, although if the divine be our true object of search and realization, our normal conduct in them and our current idea of them is the very opposite of practical. We are less ready to recognize the universal truth. We take a long time to admit it. Even partially, in theory, we are seldom ready at all to follow it in practice. And we find this difficulty because there, especially, in all our practical life, we are content to be the slaves of an outward necessity and think ourselves always excused when we admit as the law of our thought, will, and action the yoke of immediate and temporary utilities. Yet even there, we must arrive eventually at the highest truth. We shall find out in the end that our daily life and our social existence are not things apart, are not another field of existence with another law than the inner and ideal. On the contrary, we shall never find out their true meaning or resolve their harsh and often agonizing problems until we learn to see in them a means towards the discovery and the individual and collective expression of our highest, and, because our highest, therefore our truest and fullest self, our largest, most imperative principle and power of existence. All life is only a lavish and manifold opportunity given us to discover, realize, express the divine. It is in our ethical being that this truest truth of practical life, its real and highest practicality, becomes most readily apparent. It is true that the rational man has tried to reduce the ethical life, like all the rest, to a matter of reason, to determine its nature, its law, its practical action by some principle of reason, by some law of reason. He has never really succeeded, and he never can really succeed. His appearances of success are mere pretenses of the intellect, building elegant and empty constructions with words and ideas, mere conventions of logic and vamped-up syntheses. In sum, pretentious failures which break down at the first strenuous touch of reality. Such was that extraordinary system of utilitarian ethics discovered in the 19th century, the great century of science and reason and utility, by one of its most positive and systematic minds, and now deservedly discredited. Happily, we need now only smile at its shallow, pretentious errors, its substitution of a practical, outward, and occasional test for the inner, subjective, and absolute motive of ethics, its reduction of ethical action to an impossibly scientific and quite impracticable jugglery of moral mathematics, attractive enough to the reasoning and logical mind, quite false and alien to the whole instinct and intuition of the ethical being. Equally false and impracticable are other attempts of the reason to account for and regulate its principle and phenomena. The hedonistic theory, which refers all virtue to the pleasure and satisfaction of the mind in good, or the sociological, which supposes ethics to be no more than a system of formulas of conduct generated from the social sense and a ruled direction of the social impulses, and would regulate its action by that insufficient standard. The ethical being escapes from all these formulas. It is a law to itself, and finds its principle in its own eternal nature, which is not in its essential character a growth of evolving mind, even though it may seem to be that in its early history, but a light from the ideal, a reflection in man of the divine. Not that all these errors have not each of them a truth behind their false constructions. For all errors of the human reason are false representations, a wrong building, effective misconstructions of the truth, or of a side or a part of the truth. Utility is a fundamental principle of existence, and all fundamental principles of existence are, in the end, one. Therefore, it is true that the highest good is also the highest utility. It is true also that not any balance of the greatest good of the greatest number, but simply the good of others, and most widely the good of all, is one ideal aim of our outgoing ethical practice. It is that which the ethical man would like to effect, if he could only find the way and be always sure what is the real good of all. But this does not help to regulate our ethical practice, nor does it supply us with its inner principle, whether of being or of action, but only produces one of the many considerations by which we can feel our way along the road, which is so difficult to travel. Good, not utility, must be the principle and standard of good. Otherwise we fall into the hands of that dangerous pretender, expediency, whose whole method is alien to the ethical. Moreover, the stand of utility, the judgment of utility, its spirit, its form, its application, must vary with the individual nature, the habit of mind, the outlook on the world. Here there can be no reliable general law to which all can subscribe. No set of large governing principles, such as it is sought to supply to our conduct by a true ethics. Nor can ethics at all, or ever, be a matter of calculation. There is only one safe rule for the ethical man: to stick to his principle of good, his instinct for good, his vision of good, his intuition of good, and to govern by that his conduct. He may err, but he will be on his right road, in spite of all stumblings, because he will be faithful to the law of his nature. The saying of the Gita is always true. Better is the law of one's own nature, though ill performed. Dangerous is an alien law, however speciously superior it may seem to our reason. But the law of nature of the ethical being is the pursuit of good. It can never be the pursuit of utility.